Toronto-based equity firm is buying WestJet, and it's a deal worth $5 billion. Onex Corporation says the airline will continue to operate as a privately held company. Its headquarters will remain in Calgary. The friendly deal could close before the end of the year, but it still requires shareholder, court, and regulatory approval. Onex, which also owns Cineplex, is going to pay $31 per share for WestJet. The airline shares took flight on the TSX this morning, soaring more than 60%. Let's bring in John Ehrlichman of BNN Bloomberg for a closer look at the story. John, pretty good start for WestJet on the TSX. Now, I thought Air Transat was the one that was being talked about for sale. Did anybody see this coming?
Nobody saw it coming, Ken. You're absolutely right. In fact, there was a lot of talk recently that we might see this kind of deal with Air Transat. We haven't seen that yet, but here we start the week with a big one. And on paper, this actually makes a lot of sense, even though we weren't thinking about it. In the case of Onex, it's led by the billionaire investor Gerry Schwartz. He's got a deep history with the airline sector. In fact, it was 20 years ago that he tried to buy Air Canada. He was unsuccessful. He almost became an investor in Aeroplan. Onex became a major investor in a large airline parts company. They invested years ago in Sky Chefs, which makes meals for planes. So they have a deep understanding of the industry. And for WestJet, they have been struggling versus Air Canada. They've dealt with fuel costs, labor issues. They've got a new low-cost carrier. They're expanding internationally. And there was that Boeing grounding of the 737 MAX planes. It's been a lot for the company to deal with. And to your point about the stock, Ken, it has been struggling. Sometimes, if the right buyer comes along and you can do things out of the public eye, it can help. So these two coming together, and they're hoping that their shareholders will be on board with it.
Man, I would be on board. and if you did know something, you should have told me. Hey, so what's Onex going to do with this? We refer to it as an equity holding company. That's really what it is.
That's right. They are known for buying these kind of businesses for the long term. Look, WestJet has a lot of opportunity in front of it. I mean, if you look at what Air Canada has done over the last, it feels like yesterday we were talking about the financial woes for Air Canada. How did they turn things around? Well, they went to international markets that can be very lucrative. You'll notice a lot of direct flights that Air Canada does globally right now. They're making a lot of money from those flights. And WestJet really was more of a regional player for the first decade, 15 years of its existence. They've looked at what Air Canada has done. They've said, look, there's a big opportunity to expand around the world, but it costs a lot of money, Ken. So the goal is, Onex says, we want to keep the management team, keep the jobs, we want to grow it, we think there's some great opportunity long term, and that's why they're willing to pay a lot of money on this Monday morning. It's a pretty big price, but I guess if you've got long-term horizons, we'll see how it plays out.
So any impact on consumers that you can see at all, John?
Well, you know, I think that's a great point because, Ken, when WestJet recently came out with their quarterly earnings, because they've been struggling, you know what the bright spot was? Charging more for baggage, those kind of fees.
Oh, yeah, I know all about that charge.
So I think they have to be sensitive to the fact that customers don't want to be nickeled and dimed. You know, if they were to come in and just start cutting costs, that's always kind of a scary prospect for consumers. I actually think this should be seen, at least on paper, based on what they're saying today, as a good opportunity. I mean, if WestJet's going to fly to more locations around the world, if you're a Canadian looking for more options and maybe something to price check versus, say, Air Canada, maybe that's a good thing overall. So I guess we'll see how it plays out.
All right. Thank you, John. John Ehrlichman of BNN Bloomberg, always a pleasure.